It's been a bit of a shock. However much one tries to prepare oneself for something like this, it's still a dreadful shock, and we're still trying to come to terms with that. And it's very, very sad. But I have to say that
a royal home can look silent from the outside, but behind its gates, it can carry memory, power, and belonging in ways the public never fully sees. Now, a dramatic claim involving Prince Edward, the Duke of Edinburgh, Queen Camilla, and Lady Louise Windsor has raised one unsettling question. Was this really about a residence, or about who the future monarchy is quietly choosing to protect? According to recent online royal commentary, a story has begun circulating around a Windsor residence said to be linked to Edward's family, Camilla's expectations, and Louise's future. The most dramatic version claims that Prince Edward removed Camilla from what has been described as Windsor Lodge and placed the residence under Lady Louise's control. Buckingham Palace has not publicly confirmed this claim, and it remains unverified. But the reason the story has caught attention is not difficult to understand. It brings together three things the royal family has always treated with extreme care: property, legacy, and family rank. In the royal world, a residence is rarely just a place to live. It can represent approval. It can suggest security. It can show who belongs close to the center and who remains at the edge of power. A royal house carries more than furniture, portraits, and locked rooms. It carries history. It carries the memory of those who once walked through it. And sometimes, it carries a message no palace statement needs to explain. That is why the alleged Windsor Lodge story immediately feels larger than a simple housing arrangement. If the reports are accurate, this would not only be about who uses one royal property. It would raise a far more sensitive question about inheritance within the House of Windsor itself. Who receives protection when royal power begins to shift? Who is trusted with the quiet spaces connected to the late Queen Elizabeth II? And who may find that official status does not always guarantee emotional ownership? Prince Edward has long occupied a very particular place inside the royal family. Unlike louder royal figures, the Duke of Edinburgh has often been associated with patience, restraint, and steady service. He has rarely appeared to seek the spotlight, and that quietness has become part of his public image. For years, Edward and Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, have been viewed by many royal watchers as reliable figures inside the monarchy, the kind of royals who continue their duties without constantly turning private matters into public drama. That is why this claim feels so striking. Edward is not usually placed at the center of a dramatic royal confrontation. He is not the figure people expect to see challenging Camilla or reshaping a family arrangement with lasting consequences. So if royal commentators are right that his name has become attached to this alleged decision, viewers are left to wonder what could have made such a quiet royal appear so firm. Was this a sudden act of family protection, or was it the result of tension that had been building long before the public noticed? At the center of the story stands Lady Louise Windsor, a young royal whose public image is almost the opposite of ambition. Louise has grown up close to the royal family without being pushed aggressively into the spotlight. She has often been described as respectful, composed, and deeply connected to the values of her grandparents. To many observers, her bond with Queen Elizabeth II has always carried a gentle emotional weight, especially because Louise appeared to represent a quieter style of royal service, one based less on visibility and more on loyalty. And that is where the alleged transfer becomes symbolically powerful. If a Windsor residence was truly being associated with Louise, the meaning would go far beyond comfort or privilege. It would suggest that a younger royal, one who has not chased attention, may be seen as a custodian of something older and more fragile inside the monarchy. Not power in the obvious sense, not popularity in the modern celebrity sense, but continuity, restraint, and the quiet duty the late Queen valued so deeply. Queen Camilla's position in this story is more complicated. As the wife of King Charles III, she holds a central place in the current reign. Her official role is settled. Her duties are visible. Her place beside the monarch is no longer treated as temporary. Yet royal acceptance has always had more than one layer. There is constitutional acceptance, there is palace acceptance, and then there is the deeper emotional acceptance that comes from history, memory, and public feeling. Those three do not always move at the same speed. That is why any story suggesting Camilla has been moved away from a royal residence immediately carries tension. It speaks to the delicate boundary between marriage into the institution and inheritance from within it. If the claim is untrue, its popularity still reveals something important. Many people are ready to believe that there are parts of Windsor life which remain deeply tied to bloodline, the late Queen's wishes, and the quieter branch of the family that never demanded too much attention. But was this really about Camilla losing something, or about Louise being protected from something larger? That is the question that makes the story more interesting. Because the strongest royal dramas are rarely about the surface event. They are about what that event appears to expose. A residence can become a symbol of belonging. A signature can become a sign of loyalty. A young woman's name on a document, even in an unconfirmed claim, can become a statement about who the family believes should carry a certain kind of legacy forward. For King Charles III, the implication would be especially delicate. If a matter involving Camilla, Edward, and Louise truly created tension, the king would be caught between personal loyalty to his wife and family loyalty to his siblings, his mother's memory, and the next generation. That kind of tension is exactly what the monarchy tries to keep away from public view, because once the public begins interpreting private family decisions as signs of institutional direction, even silence becomes part of the story. And so Section 1 begins not with certainty, but with a question. The claim remains unconfirmed, but the emotional force behind it is already clear. Windsor Lodge, whether understood as a real dispute or a symbolic royal battleground in online commentary, has become a way of asking who truly belongs inside the protected future of the monarchy. Because to understand why the story has stirred so much attention, we have to look beyond the alleged decision itself and into what may have been quietly building around Edward, Camilla, and Lady Louise long before the public ever heard the name Windsor Lodge. What may have been quietly building around Edward, Camilla, and Lady Louise was not simply a disagreement over rooms, access, or family convenience. It was a question of what Windsor itself is meant to protect. In every royal generation, there are places that become more than addresses. They become emotional territory. They hold the memory of old loyalties, private promises, and the kind of family understanding that is rarely written plainly for the public to see. That is why the alleged Windsor Lodge story has such unusual weight. If the claim is viewed only as a property rumor, it can seem distant, even procedural. But if it is viewed as a symbol of where the late Queen's values may still be felt, then the meaning changes completely. The issue becomes not who wanted a house, but who was believed to represent the spirit of quiet service that Queen Elizabeth II spent her life rewarding in subtle ways. Edward's position in this discussion matters because he has never been the loudest figure inside the royal family. His public strength has often come from steadiness rather than spectacle, and that makes the recent commentary more intriguing. Some royal watchers believe that if Edward were ever to take a firm stand over a family matter, it would likely be because he felt a boundary had been crossed, not because he wanted a public victory. That interpretation gives the story its first deeper layer, the possibility that this was less about challenging Camilla and more about protecting a principle connected to his daughter. Lady Louise sits at the emotional center of that principle. Unlike senior working royals whose movements are constantly analyzed, Louise has occupied a softer place in the public imagination. She is visible enough to be recognized, yet private enough to feel unmanufactured. Her connection to carriage driving, her gentle association with her grandfather's interests, and her reputation for modesty have allowed many observers to see her as a young royal shaped by family tradition rather than palace ambition. In a time when royal visibility can easily become performance, that quietness has become part of her appeal. And this is where the alleged transfer, if understood symbolically, becomes far more consequential. A residence placed under Louise's protection would not only suggest personal trust, it would suggest that the family may still value royals who do not demand the brightest light. It would imply that service can be preserved outside the most powerful line of succession, and that the monarchy's emotional future may depend not only on kings and heirs, but also on quieter figures who make the institution feel human. But that same idea creates discomfort for Camilla, not because her role is legally uncertain, but because the emotional meaning of royal belonging is never simple. Queen Camilla's public journey has been one of gradual acceptance, careful duty, and institutional support. Yet stories like this reveal how complicated acceptance can become when it meets inherited memory. If a royal residence is imagined as belonging to the late Queen's quieter family vision, then Camilla's presence in that space may be interpreted by some as an extension of current royal authority rather than a continuation of old family trust. That difference matters. Authority can be granted, trust is accumulated, and within royal families, those two forces do not always move together. For Charles, that distinction would create an extremely delicate problem. The king's reign depends on unity, and unity requires the public to believe that the family has moved beyond old divisions. Yet if a story suggests that Edward is protecting Louise from being overshadowed by Camilla's household, the monarchy is suddenly pulled into a more sensitive conversation. It becomes a question of whether the king's personal loyalties and the late Queen's family instincts are perfectly aligned, or whether certain choices now expose the quiet differences between one reign and the next. Was this truly about one alleged residence arrangement, or was it part of a wider shift in how royal value is being measured? That is the question that makes the story more layered. Because in the modern monarchy, prominence is no longer the only form of power. Sometimes the most powerful royal figure in a story is the one who appears least eager to claim anything. Louise's restraint, whether intentionally or not, gives her a kind of moral advantage in the public imagination. She does not appear to be asking for influence, and that makes any protection around her feel more like duty than favoritism. This is why the alleged removal of Camilla, if royal commentators are reading the symbolism correctly, would not simply represent exclusion. It would represent a choice between two different understandings of belonging. One is based on the structure of the current reign, where Camilla's position beside Charles gives her household visibility and access. The other is based on family continuity, where Edward and Louise may be seen as carrying a quieter legacy connected to Queen Elizabeth II's private values. Neither interpretation is simple. Both carry emotional consequences. The larger implication is that Windsor Lodge, whether real estate or royal metaphor, becomes a stage for a question the monarchy will face more often in the years ahead. Who inherits the emotional authority of the late Queen's example? It is not enough to inherit titles, duties, or rooms. The harder inheritance is tone. The late Queen's strength was not only that she ruled for decades, but that she represented discipline without noise, loyalty without performance, and service without constant self-explanation. If Louise is being linked to that kind of inheritance, the public response becomes easier to understand. Yet that response also carries risk. If Louise is framed too heavily as the innocent beneficiary, she may be pulled into the kind of royal drama she has largely avoided. If Edward is framed as the protective father challenging Camilla, the story could make him appear stronger, but also more confrontational than his usual public image. If Camilla is framed as the person losing ground, old questions about acceptance may return in ways the palace would prefer to avoid. And if Charles appears unable to control the meaning of the dispute, the conversation could begin to suggest that emotional power inside the family is shifting away from the center of the current reign. That is why the story matters more than it first appeared. It touches not only property, but position. Not only family, but symbolism. Not only Louise's future, but the way the monarchy may decide who deserves protection when visibility, ambition, and service begin to pull in different directions. And once that possibility entered the conversation, the story moved into more sensitive territory because behind the alleged decision was a deeper question. Was Edward simply defending his daughter, or was the monarchy quietly revealing which kind of royal it believes should survive into the future? The question of what kind of royal should survive into the future is where the story begins to reveal its deeper shape, because the monarchy has never depended only on those standing nearest to the throne. It has also depended on quieter figures who give the institution texture, restraint, and a sense of continuity beyond the main line of succession. And if this alleged Windsor Lodge dispute has gained attention, it may be because it appears to place that quieter form of royal value directly against the visible power of the current reign. Some royal watchers believe this is why Edward's name has become so important in the conversation. He is not being discussed as a prince chasing influence, but as a father and family custodian who may have understood that once a certain boundary was crossed, silence would no longer protect the people he cared about. It remains unconfirmed whether any formal transfer or removal ever took place, and Buckingham Palace has not publicly confirmed the dramatic details circulating online. But the emotional structure of the claim is what has made it so compelling. It imagines Edward doing something rare, stepping forward not for his own position, but for someone whose quietness may have made her vulnerable. That idea touches something deeply familiar inside royal history. In monarchy, the loudest figures often dominate headlines, but the institution's long-term survival often relies on those who accept less attention while continuing to embody duty. Queen Elizabeth II understood that better than anyone. Her reign was built not on dramatic statements, but on repetition, endurance, restraint, and the ability to make service feel greater than personality. If Lady Louise is being placed inside that tradition by royal commentators, the implication is powerful. She becomes not just Edward's daughter, but a symbol of a royal style the public may be longing to see protected. And yet, that interpretation also creates tension because it quietly asks whether the monarchy has begun to value restraint more than rank. Camilla's position is elevated through marriage and reign. Louise's appeal, by contrast, comes from discretion, family memory, and an apparent lack of appetite for public power. Those are very different forms of legitimacy. One is official, the other is emotional, and the modern monarchy increasingly needs both. This is where Charles's position becomes more complicated than it first appears. As monarch, he must preserve the dignity of the present reign. But as the son of the late queen, he also inherits the responsibility of protecting the family culture she left behind. If a story suggests that Edward and Louise are linked to that older culture of service without ambition, while Camilla is linked to the practical needs of the current royal household, then the issue becomes more than personal discomfort. It becomes a symbolic clash between two versions of royal belonging. Was this about family loyalty, or was the institution quietly protecting itself from a future where every royal space becomes a contest for influence? That is the question beneath the surface. Because in any royal household, access can slowly become power. A residence can become a foothold. A private arrangement can become precedent. And once precedent is established, reversing it can be far more difficult than preventing it in the first place. This is why, according to some commentators, the alleged decision matters even as speculation. It suggests that someone may have recognized the long-term consequences before they became impossible to undo. For Edward, that recognition would carry personal weight. He has spent much of his royal life away from the constant drama surrounding the direct line of succession, but that does not mean he lacks understanding of how palace influence works. The quieter members of the family often see what public-facing figures miss. They see how seating plans become signals, how invitations become measures of status, how small adjustments reveal who is being drawn closer and who is being edged aside. In that world, a residence is never just a residence. It is a map of belonging. Louise's place on that map would be especially delicate. She is not a senior working royal in the way older generations might have expected, yet she carries a kind of symbolic usefulness that cannot be manufactured. Her image is gentle, unforced, and connected to a branch of the family that many people view with warmth. If she is protected too openly, she risks being pulled into a storm she never sought. If she is not protected at all, she risks being overshadowed by stronger households with clearer institutional machinery behind them. That tension may explain why the story feels less like a property claim and more like a warning. Camilla's role, in this interpretation, becomes almost tragic in its complexity. She may not be seeking conflict in the way the most dramatic online versions suggest, and it would be unfair to treat unverified claims as established fact. But symbolically, she represents the force of the current court, the network, the household, the needs of the reigning monarch's wife, and the reality that a queen's private world naturally expands around the throne. That expansion may be normal inside a reign, but when placed beside the late queen's quieter family legacy, it can appear more forceful than intended. This is the contradiction the palace would have to manage carefully. The monarchy needs Camilla to appear secure, respected, and settled. It also needs Edward, Sophie, and Louise to remain part of the wider family picture without looking diminished. If one side appears to gain too much, the other may seem vulnerable. If Louise appears pushed aside, the public may see it as an insult to the late queen's values. If Camilla appears excluded, others may view it as reopening old tensions around her acceptance. There is no easy emotional balance here, because every interpretation carries a cost. The alleged Windsor Lodge story also points toward a larger transition happening quietly across the royal family. The monarchy is moving from one emotional era to another. The late Queen's reign was defined by permanence. Charles's reign is defined by transition. William's future reign may be defined by selectivity, a sharper sense of which symbols, people, and family traditions should carry forward, and which ones must be contained before they create instability. In that environment, even a story about a house can feel like a rehearsal for the future. And that is what makes Edward's imagined role so striking. If the claim is understood as symbolic commentary rather than confirmed fact, he becomes the figure drawing a line between inheritance as privilege and inheritance as responsibility. He does not need to appear rebellious for the story to carry force. He only needs to appear convinced that Louise represents something worth preserving. That conviction, whether real or constructed by commentary, gives the story its emotional spine. But even that does not explain the most sensitive part of the situation. Because the deepest question is not whether Louise should be protected, or whether Camilla's household should have limits. The deepest question is whether the monarchy can still recognize quiet service before it is overwhelmed by proximity to power. And once that possibility entered the conversation, the story moved into far more dangerous territory, because the next stage was not only about who belonged inside Windsor Lodge. It was about who had the authority to decide what Windsor itself should mean. And that question brought the story to its most sensitive stage, because Windsor was never simply a name on a map. It is one of the monarchy's emotional centers, a place where family memory, royal authority, and private hierarchy quietly meet. So if the reports surrounding Windsor Lodge are accurate, the alleged decision was not only about who could use one residence. It was about who had the right to decide what belonging should mean after Queen Elizabeth II. Buckingham Palace has not publicly confirmed the dramatic claims involving Edward, Camilla, and Louise, and the details remain unverified. But the reaction has already created its own pressure. People are not only asking whether Camilla was removed from a property. They are asking why Louise's name changes the emotional meaning of a story so quickly. They are asking why Edward, usually one of the quieter royal figures, is suddenly imagined as the person willing to draw a line. And they are asking whether this was truly a private family matter, or a sign that the monarchy's inner balance is beginning to shift. For Edward, the alleged move carries a meaning far beyond confrontation. He has never been known as a royal figure who builds his life around public drama. His strength has often been patience, reliability, and loyalty to the institution without constantly demanding attention from it. That is why, if royal watchers believe he acted firmly, the story immediately takes on a different tone. It suggests not ambition, but protection, not rebellion, but a father recognizing that quietness can sometimes make someone easier to overlook. Louise's position makes that protection feel especially powerful. She is not viewed by the public as someone chasing influence, titles, or royal importance. Her appeal comes from the opposite. She appears steady, modest, and connected to a style of royal life that feels older and less performative. In a monarchy increasingly judged by visibility, conflict, and public image, Louise represents restraint. So if Windsor Lodge is linked to her, even through speculation, the residence becomes more than a possible inheritance. It becomes a symbol of quiet service being defended before it disappears. That is where the pressure on Camilla becomes most uncomfortable. Her position beside Charles is official, but this story tests something official rank cannot completely settle. It tests emotional reach. Some royal commentators believe the public can accept Camilla as queen while still feeling that certain spaces connected to the late queen's family values belong somewhere else. That distinction may be difficult, even painful, but it explains why the story has traveled so quickly. A title can place someone near the center of power, but memory decides whether the public believes that person belongs in every part of the royal story. Charles would be placed in the most delicate position of all. As king, he must protect the dignity of his wife. As the late queen's son, he must also respect the family culture she left behind. And as head of the monarchy, he cannot allow private tension to look like institutional fracture. If this alleged dispute were true, even in part, it would force him into a choice where every possible response carries risk. Defending Camilla too strongly could seem to dismiss the quieter legacy attached to Louise. Remaining neutral could make him appear powerless. Correcting the story publicly could give unverified claims even more attention. That is why palace silence can become its own kind of drama. A denial might sound defensive. A statement might invite new questions. Yet saying nothing allows the public to create its own meaning, and in this case, that meaning is already powerful. Many viewers may see Louise as the young royal who did not ask for the spotlight, Edward as the father trying to protect her, Camilla as the figure whose influence has limits, and Charles as the monarch caught between marriage, memory, and duty. The turning point is that the story has moved beyond ordinary royal gossip. It now touches the future image of the monarchy. The public is not only watching who receives titles or who stands on the balcony. It is watching which values are rewarded. Is quiet service still protected? Is restraint still respected? Can someone who avoids attention still be valued inside a system that often gives power to those nearest the throne? This is also why the alleged Windsor Lodge dispute carries a historical echo. Royal residences have always been more than practical arrangements. They signal favor, trust, closeness, and permanence. Who is given a home, who is moved aside, who remains near Windsor, and who becomes peripheral can all become part of a larger royal message. In the past, those messages could remain private for years. Now, one claim can turn a family arrangement into a public debate about fairness, inheritance, and influence. For the wider family, the risk is that Louise becomes a symbol before she is chosen to become a participant. If she is framed as protected, the story may strengthen public affection for her. But if she is drawn too deeply into speculation, it could place pressure on a young woman whose appeal depends partly on staying outside the storm. Edward may appear principled, but also unexpectedly forceful. Camilla may appear unfairly targeted or emotionally limited by history. Charles may appear careful, conflicted, or constrained. Every interpretation changes how the public sees the people involved. And if the palace was watching closely, what did it see that the public may have missed? Perhaps it saw that sympathy is no longer automatically attached to rank. Sometimes it moves toward the person who seems least powerful. Sometimes it gathers around restraint. Sometimes it protects the quiet figure rather than the official one. That is a serious challenge for any monarchy, because hierarchy can define position, but it cannot force emotional loyalty. So whether Windsor Lodge was truly transferred or not, the reaction has already revealed something important. The public is watching not just who gains access inside the royal family, but who deserves it. And that is where the final part of the story becomes impossible to ignore, because the real consequence was not only what may have happened around one residence. It was what this moment revealed about the kind of monarchy the next generation may inherit. The kind of monarchy the next generation may inherit will not be judged only by crowns, ceremonies, or the formal order of succession. It will be judged by the choices made in quieter places, by the people protected when no applause is guaranteed, and by the values the royal family chooses to preserve when power, memory, and personal loyalty begin to collide. That is why this reported Windsor Lodge story has carried so much weight, even while the most dramatic claims remain unconfirmed. At its heart, this was never simply about one residence. It was about whether the monarchy still knows how to recognize service that does not announce itself. In an age where royal life is constantly photographed, debated, and interpreted, quietness can easily be mistaken for weakness. Louise's appeal, for many observers, comes from the fact that she does not appear to be reaching for attention. And in that silence, the public may see something increasingly rare, a young royal connected to tradition without seeming consumed by status. That is why the symbolism around Edward matters. If the reports are accurate, or even if the story is understood only as royal commentary, his alleged role represents a protective instinct that goes beyond fatherhood. It suggests a desire to preserve a branch of the family that has often served without dominating the center of the monarchy. Edward's strength in this story is not presented as ambition. It is presented as boundary. And in royal life, boundaries can sometimes reveal more than open confrontation ever could. For Camilla, the meaning is more difficult. The story does not erase her place beside Charles, and it should not be used to treat speculation as fact. But it does show that her acceptance, however official, continues to be measured through emotion as well as rank. A queen may be secure in position and still face limits in how the public imagines her relationship to older family legacies. That is the uncomfortable truth this kind of story exposes. Monarchy may grant status, but memory decides how far that status feels accepted. Charles, meanwhile, stands at the center of a larger transition. His reign is not only about leadership, It is about carrying the monarchy from the long shadow of his mother into the uncertain expectations of the future. If a story like this gains attention, it is because people sense the tension between the current reign and the emotional inheritance left by Queen Elizabeth II. The late Queen's example still carries enormous moral weight. Her image remains associated with discipline, restraint, and duty without self-promotion. Any royal figure who appears connected to those values receives a kind of public sympathy that no palace office can manufacture. That may be the deeper consequence. The monarchy is entering a period where emotional legitimacy matters almost as much as constitutional legitimacy. People are not only asking who has the right title, they are asking who reflects the values they still respect. They are asking who appears dutiful without being demanding, visible without being vain, protected without seeming entitled. And if Louise has become a symbol in this story, it is because she appears to answer that question in a way many viewers find reassuring. But that also places pressure on her. A quiet royal can become powerful precisely because she seems untouched by the hunger for power. Yet the moment public attention gathers around her, that innocence becomes harder to protect. If Louise is praised too heavily, she risks being pulled into expectations she may never have asked for. If she is ignored, the monarchy risks overlooking one of the qualities the public still values most. That tension may become one of the smaller but revealing tests of how the royal family handles its next generation. For the institution itself, the lesson is clear. The future of the crown will not depend only on the direct line from Charles to William. It will also depend on the supporting figures who make the monarchy feel balanced, rooted, and humane. Every royal family needs central authority, but it also needs quieter examples around it. People who show that service does not always need to be dramatic to matter. Without them, monarchy can begin to look too narrow, too polished, and too detached from the older idea of duty. That is why royal observers may continue watching Edward, Sophie, and Louise more closely than before. Not because they are expected to dominate the future, but because they may represent the kind of steady support the monarchy needs as it changes shape. They offer a contrast to the more visible pressures surrounding the king, Camilla, William, and Catherine. They remind the public that the royal family is not only a line of succession, but a web of relationships, responsibilities, and inherited meanings. And if the Windsor Lodge speculation has revealed anything, it is that the public is deeply sensitive to signs of fairness inside that web. People notice who appears protected. They notice who appears pushed aside. They notice when quiet service is rewarded and when influence seems to expand too easily. That does not mean every online claim should be accepted as truth. It means the emotional reaction to those claims can still reveal something true about public expectations. So the final meaning of this story is not that one person won and another lost. It is that the monarchy's private decisions, real or rumored, are now being judged through a much wider lens. A residence can become a symbol. A young royal can become a measure of restraint. A queen's influence can become a test of boundaries. A father's alleged protection can become a statement about what should survive. So what do you think? Was this simply one royal development, or does it point to a much larger shift inside the monarchy? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep royal analysis, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next documentary-style royal story. As this live stream continues and the next story begins, one question remains. When the crown protects its future, will it choose power, position, or the quiet values that made people believe in it in the first place?